All right, I'm seeing this conversation a ton on NBA social media. I'm going to be very honest. It's pretty annoying that we are here again and we're doing this as NBA fans. But conversation right now is that Anthony Edwards has regressed. Obviously, if you've been watching him over these last few games, he just has not been at his best, right? Lower scoring games by his standards, not super efficient tonight against the Celtics in a loss. This was just not a great Anthony Edwards game. And it was one of those times where he's matched up against another elite player that plays near his position and he gets outplayed. And obviously, people are going to react to stuff like that. But we've looked at these performances and people have run with this idea that Anthony Edwards has regressed, right? Or that last playoff run for him, which was an unbelievable playoff run, getting that Timberwolves team to the Western Conference Finals, it was a fluke, right? Like that's the conversation happening right now with Anthony Edwards. I wish we would stop doing that because time and time again, we get to a point where we form these opinions about guys so early in their career while they're on the process of becoming superstars, and they end up proving us wrong in a monumental way, and we end up looking stupid. Like, case in point is Jason Tatum. I don't care what you say about Jason Tatum. A lot of people were saying things like, you know, he was a disappointment, right? Like before he won that championship just last season, there were a lot of opinions about Jason Tatum and how he just really hasn't lived up to expectations. No matter what you think about his game, he did what everybody said he couldn't do, and he was a crucial piece on a championship winning team. People questioned Jason Tatum's ability to be a crucial piece and a potential closer on a championship winning team. What did he do in that game 5 in that series against the Mavericks? He closed them out. Was he amazing that whole series? No, but he still did some amazing things from an all-around standpoint. And as I said, he was the best player in that game 5, in that closing game to help the Celtics win a championship, right? So how many times are we going to do this thing where we are forming these opinions and making these wide statements about these guys so early on in their career while they're on this process? So for Anthony Edwards, yes, this season has not been, I think, what a lot of people expected. I think people expected somewhat of an MVP run from Anthony Edwards this year. And he's not super, super far off from it. There's still some very impressive things that he's done this year, especially the three-point shooting. So Charles Barkley was talking about on Inside the NBA that he's taking too many threes. That can be true. Maybe you feel like he's settling, but he's making 40% of his three-point shots. And what's more impressive is he's carrying a massive load on the offensive end for that Timberwolves team because a lot of guys in that starting lineup have been massively inefficient from a three-point shooting standpoint this season. That Timberwolves offense isn't struggling because of Anthony Edwards, right? It's a lack of production and consistent production from some other guys, right? And there are guys doing some impressive things. I'm not totally throwing this team under the bus, but in context of this Timberwolves offense, Anthony Edwards is doing some very impressive things, right? And if you watch the games, you can get a good understanding sometimes as to why he's settling for some shots here and there. A lot of times the offense looks like he kind of has to take over maybe late in the shot clock, and he has to be the guy to go out there and get these looks because a lot of other things aren't working. That's just the situation. This Wolves offense as a whole is not a good offense. Same issue as it was last season. So in context of a struggling team offense, Anthony Edwards is trying to do what he can do. So again, I'm not excusing all of it. There are still some things he needs to improve on. There's some IQ stuff he can get better at. There is some other stuff he can kind of sharpen up on. But in context of this Timberwolves offense, the way that Anthony Edwards is playing, it makes a bit of sense, right? So there's that. So just because Anthony Edwards has not fully lived up to the expectations that people had for him this season, and like I said, for a lot of people, that was him potentially being an MVP candidate, just because he hasn't played at that particular level. And again, he's not too far off. That doesn't mean there's this mass regression from Anthony Edwards. Like, he's around 25 points a game. Is that like MVP level stuff? No, especially on a Timberwolves team that's been pretty mediocre this season. But still, I don't watch Anthony Edwards play this season and think that he fell off relative to last year. Has he been as impressive this season relative to last season? Well, I think the real question is, have the Timberwolves been as impressive this season relative to last season? No, not at all. There are a lot of issues right now with this team. I think a lot of their issues come with the fact that really not just this season, but last season, they've always struggled to identify like that secondary shot creator within their offense, right? They always had an issue with finding that part out. Like right now, you're trying to deal with this Julius Randle thing, and he hasn't been horrible, but you question the fit. You question some of the things that he's out there doing, right? So I think that's the biggest issue for the Timberwolves is they have not yet identified an amazing secondary option on the offensive end. There are nights where that looks like Nas Reed, right? And maybe he should be getting more looks and allowed to fit within that type of role next to Anthony Edwards because he's efficient. He gets to his shots quick, just fits next to him, fits well within an offense. But all of that stuff, um, there are inherent issues right now with the Timberwolves, and the offense has struggled because of that. And that's what I think the biggest issue and disappointment has been. I don't look at Anthony Edwards and think you've had such a bad season. I look at the Timberwolves as a whole, and I don't think they did a great job at building this roster to follow up on that Western Conference Finals run that they made last season. But I don't look at Anthony Edwards and think there is a regression in his game. Just simply that. Like I said, has he been what we wanted him to be this season? No. But it's still all-star level. It's still arguably all-NBA level. I don't see how that's regression. I don't see how you put an all-star caliber season up and an all-NBA caliber season up and shoot 40% from three on a bad offense, and that's a regression. A regression is Tyrese Halliburton, right? Like, and maybe he's picking it up a bit, and the Pacers have been picking it up just a bit over like these last few weeks, but that's a regression where you go from essentially being like 20 and 10 on these ridiculous splits to having those numbers substantially reduce, right? Like that's what I would look at as a regression, right? Anthony Edwards is not having that type of season at all. At all. And even with Halliburton, still give him time, right? Like, I'm not closing the door on the Tyrese Halliburton thing yet after like a first half of the season where he hasn't been at his best. So why do that with Anthony Edwards? Like, the conversation right now, people are making these hyperbolic statements that he fell off, right? And last postseason for him was a fluke and all of this sort of stuff that people come up with. I just think people are overreacting once again. And like I said, as NBA fans, we tend to do that all the time, right? We're writing somebody off so quickly. And it's way too early in the season and way too early in Anthony Edwards' path to superstardom for us to be looking at this as a regression and thinking that what we saw last postseason was a fluke. That's just my thoughts. I'm not a fan of the conversation that's going on right now. I saw Inside the NBA talking about it. I just have not looked at Anthony Edwards this season and thought regression. Like I said, has he improved at the rate that people wanted him to improve? No. Like, that's pretty clear. Ant should be an MVP candidate. And granted, he would be if the Wolves were a better team. But still, like, I can't look at his production this season and think that it's this mass disappointment, right? Or there's a regression. There's this massive decline from last season into this season, especially so early into the year. So those are just my thoughts. I had to get my thoughts on it because, again, we're just seeing this conversation show its ugly face again on NBA Twitter after a regular season game. I'm just not a big fan of it at all because I think too many times we end up getting proven so wrong that it gets embarrassing. And this idea of counting guys out so early in their career just consistently gets stomped on. It's at a point where it's like, why do we keep engaging in these particular conversations? Why does it have to be a regression? Why does it have to be that Anthony Edwards isn't who we thought he was, right? Like, I don't get why we keep falling into that particular debate and that particular conversation, but here we are. So hopefully Anthony Edwards can pick it up because, like I said, I'm being honest. Yes, he's been struggling over these last few. There are still weaknesses and holes, but I don't think we are at a point where I'm thinking regression and I'm thinking Anthony Edwards is a disappointment and last playoff run was a fluke. Even if this team doesn't end up making a deep playoff run this particular season, there's still room for this thing to work. right? Like there have been plenty of teams that have shown great flashes early on and just never really could get over that hump. Maybe there was a coaching change, or maybe there were some other core pieces that were moved around. That's happened before where a team makes a surprise run, then they go through a period of stagnation, then they end up figuring it out at some point in time. That's happened a ton of times. And I think that could be the situation here in Minnesota. Again, too early to tell. We're not even at the halfway mark in the season, but we've been wildly overreacting to this Anthony Edwards thing. And I can't wait for him to turn it around. I can't wait for the Wolves to figure this thing out. Can they figure it out with this core and with what they currently have? We'll see. But the overreactions to Anthony Edwards, way, way too over the top at this point.